Welcome to edupediaworld.com. So in today's video, we will talk about one of the very important concept of ecology, which is food chain and food webs. We'll also talk about various ecological pyramids, right? So in the previous video, we spoke about various, producers and consumers, decomposers, and how are these three, that is consumers, producers, and decomposers are interconnected with each other. We also talk about some of the abiotic components and the interaction between the biotic as well as the abiotic components in a particular ecosystem. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about the food chains and food webs and how the energy is getting transferred in a food chain or a food web. So what do you think is a food chain? Basically, if you just look at this word, the food chain, food means it is some kind of energy that we all require. Even humans require energy. We require food. The animals also require food because they need to have energy. And chain means if the living organisms are interconnected with each other, so that becomes a chain. So now food chain means when the organisms are interacting with each other, and in this interactions, if the food is getting transferred from one organism to the other organism, or we can say one tropic level to the other tropic level, so this becomes a chain and it is known as a food chain. So in very simple terms, we can say that who eats whom. So that forms a food chain. Which animal feeds on which other animal. That becomes a food chain. Let us look at a very simple example. Just look at this first chain here. This is a chain. Now this is a green plant or a green grass. Now this green grass is eaten by a rabbit. And after which the rabbit is again eaten by some wild fox or some wild, let's say, dog. So this becomes a chain. What happens in this chain? The food, this is the primary producer, which is a plant. The primary producer becomes food for the rabbit, and in turn the rabbit becomes food for this wild animal. So the food is transferred from the primary producer to the consumer and then to the secondary consumer. So this becomes a simple food chain. And how many steps does it have? It has got 3 steps. So the first is the plant, the second is the rabbit, and the third is the wild animal. Now look at this food chain. Again, the primary producer is the grass, which produces energy, and it becomes food for the grasshopper. The grasshopper in turn becomes food for the mouse, and mouse is eaten by the owl. So this is another type of food chain, but how many steps does it has? It has 4 steps. So food chain can be, of 2 steps, can be of 3 steps, can be of 4 steps. So these are basically steps, or we can say stages. So 2 stage, 3 stage, 4 stage, 5 stage. It may have, a lot of stages. Look at this food chain. What is happening here? This is a green plant over here. The green plant is eaten by a grasshopper, which is eaten by the frog. The frog is eaten by the snake, and the snake is eaten by these vultures or the crow or the eagle, right? And these green plants, they obtain their energy from sun. So the cycle is getting completed, right? When the last stage, that is, let's say the crow or these vultures, which will eat the snake, the dead snake, when they will decay, what happens? They will decompose, and in turn they will produce some kind of inorganic compounds. And these inorganic compounds will be used by these primary producers in order to produce some energy, right? Some food. So this again becomes a chain, but it has a lot of stages. Look at this. There is sun, and this light energy is again used by the primary producers. This grass or green plant is eaten by a deer, and the deer is further eaten by this wild animal. It may be a tiger or it may be a lion, right? So the primary source of energy is actually sun, which is utilized by the green plants, and they become the primary producers, right? So what is a food chain? Now you have seen 4 types of food chain. What is a food chain? A food chain is a linear network starting from a producer organism ending at the apex predator species. So what is a producer organism here? The green plant. Almost in all the food chains we have the green plants or the trees which becomes the primary producers, and the predator species may be at the second level or at the third stage, it may be. So over here it is these eagle or the vultures or the crow which will eat the snake, so they become the last step in the series. Over here this lion or tiger will become the last, the predator species. It starts from the plant and ends up at the predator species, so that becomes a whole chain which is known as food chain. We can also define food chain as step-by-step sequence linking organisms that feed on each other, starting with a food source, which is the plant, and ending up with the consumers, which is the animal. Ultimately, the animal becomes a consumer. So this becomes a food chain because the food is getting transferred from one stage on to the other stage, on to the third stage, and so on. That's why it's called a food chain. Now, let's talk about the tropic level in a food chain. So now I said the food chains have got a lot of stages. Some are two stage, some are 3 stage. So every stage has been divided, and each stage will be given a tropic level. So let's say this is the first tropic level, which contains only producers, that is the green plants. Then, like in this case, the herbivores comes the second stage. The second stage will be always the herbivores, which are the primary consumers. So that becomes a tropic level 2. Second comes the carnivores, which are actually the secondary consumers, which will consume the primary consumers. So they are carnivores, and this level will be called a tropic level 3. And thereafter, it is the top carnivores which will eat these secondary consumers or the carnivores, and these are called the tertiary consumers. This becomes tropic level 4. So every food chain has got different levels, different stages, and each stage will be now called a tropic level. Each stage will be one tropic level. In this case, we have 4 tropic level. Some of the food chains will have only 3 tropic levels, some will have only 2 tropic level, depending upon the kind of ecosystem they are existing in. You understood what is tropic level? Basically, you are representing food chains in these tropic levels. So the base of this tropic level, that is the first tropic level, will always be producers, which are called the autotrophs. Basically, the plants are autotrophs. Second level will always be herbivores, and third level will always be carnivores. So these are the major 3 levels. Of course, here I have shown the top carnivores, but these will be one category. So tropic level 1, tropic level 2, and tropic level 3. Now this is again a representation of how the tropic levels are divided. So we have the producers, then we have the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, the tertiary consumers, and the quaternary consumers. This is in case a food chain has many stages, like more than 2, more than 3, even more than 4 stages. So this is the way that the tropic levels will be represented. So the consumers are basically these. That is from primary to the quaternary. These are all the consumers, and these are the producers. That is, the base is always the producer. So let's now talk about various kinds of food chain. There are 3 types of food chains that are available in the environment, in any ecosystem. And predominantly we have these 2 kinds. That is, the first is the grazing food chain and the detritus food chain. These 2 are predominantly available in the environment. Parasitic food chain is also available, but it is not so usually seen. So let's talk about first these two food chains. Grazing food chain is very common in grassland areas, in grassland ecosystem. However, the detritus food chain is seen where there are dense forest. Secondly, the grazing food chain will always start from green plants, whereas the detritus food chain will always start from dead organic matter. Because this grazing food chain starts from the living green plants, that is why it is dependent on solar energy. However, the detritus food chain does not directly depend on the solar energy, but it is indirectly dependent. Because, or we can say it is less dependent on the solar energy. This grazing food chain supports this detritus food chain by making different kinds of organic compounds, because it is only the green plants which produce the organic compounds, right? Whereas this detritus food chain will support the grazing food chain by making different kinds of inorganic substances, because eventually when a particular any animal or any species it decomposes, it produces a lot of inorganic substances, and these inorganic substances will then be used by the green plants in order to produce their food, that is the glucose, by using the sunlight, and the process is called photosynthesis. So the green plants will be using these inorganic substances which are provided by the detritus food chain. Example of grazing food chain is a simple example which we have seen earlier. Like we have a green plant will be eaten by rabbit, and this rabbit will be eaten by any wild animal. So this becomes a grazing food chain, right? However, the detritus food chain is I said it is very common in forest. So what happens in forest? The dead leaves which have already fallen off from the trees, these dead leaves will decay, and these will be eaten by these small insect, right? And again these insects will be eaten by this black bird. So this becomes, now just look at this. This chain starts from a dead matter. This is a dead leaf. So the chain starts from dead matter. However, this chain, that is the grazing food chain, will start from green living plants. So that is what I was talking about, right? So these two chains are predominantly available in an environment. Grazing food chain is very common where we have grassland areas, and detritus food chain is very common where we have dense forest. Now let's talk about parasitic food chain also. In parasitic food chain, the food energy is transferred into small organism. The producers and consumers are parasized into small organism. That is, it neither starts from a green plant nor it starts from a dead matter. Any producer, it may be a green plant, or any consumer, it may be any insect or any animal, that will just get parasized into small organism. It will decay and it will get parasized into a small organism, and this small organism will then provide energy, and that's how the food is transferred, that's how the energy is transferred. Let's say we have plants. These plants will be eaten by herbivores. These herbivores will be eaten by parasites, and in turn the parasites will be eaten by hyperparasites. So basically here the plants are converted into very small organisms, which in this case is hyperparasites. So we say plants are parasized into small organisms. So this food chain is known as parasitic food chain, right? So I hope you must have understood various different kinds of food chains, because we will be talking these food chains in next few videos also. Now that we know about what is a food chain, what is a simple food chain, now can you guess what is a food web? The name itself suggests that a web is some kind of network, some kind of crisscross network. So a food web is when we have a lot of food chains that are interconnected with each other, that becomes a food web. That is, it is not that one particular, let's say, producer is eaten by a consumer, and that consumer is again eaten by a secondary consumer. It is not just a linear chain like that, but it is one particular living organism can be eaten by two, and that organism can in turn eat two more. So that becomes a food web, and there are a lot of food chains that are interconnected, and this forms a food web. So let's talk about this food web. What do we see here? We have green grass over here. The grass is not only eaten by grasshopper but is also eaten by rabbit, and in turn the rabbit is eaten by fox. Whereas here the grasshopper is not only eaten by owls but is also eaten by birds. This bird in turn becomes food for the fox. So these two food chains are, let's say, connected. You can see here this food chain ultimately comes to the fox, and even this food chain, that is a grass, grasshopper, bird, and then fox. So two food chains are connected at this point, that is at fox. Look at this. You have grains eaten by mice. The mice is eaten by owl. So again, two food chains are again connected at owl. One is grass, grasshopper, and owl, and grain, mice, and owl. So this becomes a food web where we have two or more food chains interconnected with each other. So now let's talk about the significance of food web. Now that we have studied what is a food chain and a food web, so why is it important to study food web, and why is a food chain so important in ecology? That is because it maintains ecological balance. Let's imagine a case that let's say there are no mongoose available, and there are, because the snakes are not eaten by let's say the mongoose or the eagles or any vultures. Let's say there are a lot of snakes available in the ecosystem. What will happen? Obviously they will become a threat. Availability of so many snakes will be a threat to even the human lives. So it creates a lot of imbalance in the ecosystem. So to maintain this ecological balance, the food web is to be maintained. The food chain is to be maintained. Also, to understand the relationship between many organisms, like we need to know which organism eats what organism, who wants whom, who will become prey to which animal. So this is very important because it makes us understand what is the relationship between organisms. Energy flow and nutrient cycle. A food web helps us to understand what is the energy flow, in which direction is the energy flowing, from where to where is the food getting transferred, is the energy getting transferred, and what are the various nutrient cycle in a particular ecosystem. So these informations will be available only if we study food chain properly. Secondly, food chain tells us that it is not that for a particular organism there is only one particular kind of food available, but he has an alternate available with himself. Let's say it is not that the rat will be only eaten by owl, but the rat can be eaten by cat or any other animal, or let's say a dog. So alternate source of food is always available if we have food webs and food chain properly maintained. So now let's talk about another important concept which is known as ecological pyramid. Ecological pyramid is nothing but it is a graphical representation of food chain. We studied about food chain as a linear chain. Grass is eaten by a rabbit or is eaten by a wild animal. But if we represent the same thing in a form of a graph, that is in a form of a pyramid, then this is called as ecological pyramid. And there are three kinds of such pyramids that are available. That is the pyramid of number, the pyramid of biomass, and the pyramid of energy. So let's just discuss each one of them, one by one. So now the three kinds of pyramids. So these, the concept of this ecological pyramid was given by Alton in 1927. And pyramid of number, we generally designate the number of organism that is available in every level. Let's say as per this graph, if we have trees, so we will say how many trees over here, how many giraffes over here, and how many lions over here. So this just basically represents the number of organism, or let's say the consumers or the producers that are available at every level. Pyramid of biomass represents the weight of that organism that is available at every level. So here it is the dead weight of these plants, that is the weight of these plants, then weight of these giraffes, and the dead weight of the lion. So this is nothing but the dead weight of each and every organism that is available at every level. Pyramid of energy shows that how much of energy is available at every level. Let's say trees, so how much of energy is here? Now when this energy, or let's say the food, is transferred onto the giraffe, then some amount of energy lost is there in terms of heat. So what is the energy left in this stage, that is in this level? Again, when these will be eaten by lion, some amount of the food is transferred, so the energy is also transferred onto the next level. So what is the amount of energy available at this level, that is the third level? The representation of energy at each level will be given by the pyramid of energy. So these pyramid, that is ecological pyramid, the pyramid of biomass, the pyramid of energy, and the pyramid of number will be discussed along with examples to explain to you how are they applied in any ecosystem, and this will be discussed in the next video. So thank you for watching Edupedia World videos.